Hello, everyone. Welcome to this first in a new podcast series from myself. My name's Ben Purton. I'm going to be calling this Enablement Extracted, which sounds a bit like an operation, really. But one of the main reasons for that is we're going to be heavily focusing around coaching and AI and how to extract all the good stuff from data, from calls, from all that stuff when it comes to utilization of AI. I'm joined today by Kieran Smith, and I know him very well because not only have I seen him at multiple events, but he is a Golden Gong winner, which we're going to talk about in a sec, and I'll let him introduce himself, as well as having extensive experience at multiple companies when it comes to the world of enablement. Kieran, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I mean that was pretty good. I'll take that. I don't really need to spoil it after that, but yeah, no. I've been in enablement for about 3 or 4 years. Made a conscious decision to move over from sales leadership after a few sort of head of sales roles that weren't quite going the way that I wanted them to go in terms of being able to put in processes and stuff like that. And I felt that enablement had just the potential to fit all my passions as well as my skill sets. So yeah, I've worked for Andela thus far from a global company. I'm sorry, a global team point of view, and then I've just most recently been at Staffbase where I was the enablement lead for EMEA and APAC. As you know, I had a fairly lengthy job title there, which encompassed a little bit of everything.
And I mentioned your Golden Gong Award. What was that for? Talk to me about that.
Let me flash it to you first because I like to bring it up at every single opportunity. So, it's probably my proudest moment. Certainly, or one of them. Certainly the flashiest moment of my enablement career thus far. Basically, I joined Andela in 2021, I think. And because I had bought and implemented Gong and used lots of call recordings as part of my life in sales, my boss at the time, Carl Elena, said, "Do you want to own this as the product owner?" I said, "Absolutely." And then we were just towards the end of the year. It was just had like a end of 2021. We had a meeting, just like an end of year meeting with Gong. This is how well you're using it. This is the adoption, and they brought up something called the Golden Gong Awards, and I was like, "What is that? That sounds a little bit of me." But obviously, it was too late to enter for with the 1 month of the year left. It was a little bit too late to enter. But I said to Carly and the rest of our team that was the goal. That would be, pardon the pun, but that would be the gold standard for us that we'd be going for 2022. And literally, the project plan was called Project Golden Gong. We rolled it out. It was very like manifested, but essentially, what the Golden Gong is, it's a customer award, and the title that we won it for was Best Revenue Performance Story. So what that means is using conversation intelligence to impact revenue performance. So I'm sure we'll dive into it, but that encompasses things like coaching culture, scorecards, analytics, using insights, adoption of messaging, etc., etc. But then we actually had to provide concrete needle moving metrics like X amount of time to deal, or we reduced the sales cycle by 12 weeks, etc., etc. All these lovely things. And it was a very, very proud moment to actually win that with myself and the team.
Huge congratulations. And this is a very popular topic, conversational intelligence, AI in general, having that extra person or people to come into your almost enablement teams and help you with that coaching. You mentioned and you broke it down really well there, like different variables that go into successfully adopting a CA or CI tool at your business. Talk to me a little bit about how that was broken down. How did you use it to coach? How did you
Yeah.
use it with KPIs?
Well, I think interestingly, I think the way that I did it, and I think this is actually the way that lots of companies advise you to use it, is that we started with the best practice libraries. So again, it's giving people examples of what's happening. However, having done it at two different companies now, from an enablement point of view, I actually find that that's a massive amount of work. It's a heavy lift to go and find these things, and especially depending on what point your company is at, you might not actually have a lot of examples of best practice to be able to fill that with. And that's because when I went to Andela, we were just implementing processes and playbooks and stuff like that. So when I was spending hours and hours looking for clips, I didn't really know what I was looking for, right? So that was difficult. So I think, excuse me, for me, I think the first way that I would use it is to get a pulse check on what's actually being said. So, you and I have spoken about this before, and even at the SEC event back in November, I find that lots of companies use conversation intelligence as a compliance tool. Are they saying this? Are they saying what they told them? I think if you just first implement Gong, yes, or any CI tool, you want people to be using it and adopting it and just playing about with it at first in the background, enablement and ops and people like that. I think you want to be getting a real pulse check for what's actually going on. So you might have to break that down. Is it just a qualification call for an SDR? So it's almost like pick one call type per role. Understand where you are. Again, it's like a benchmarking or a level setting exercise before you jump into it. And then I think from there, when you know what's actually been said, you know what to coach to, or okay, we're actually quite good at this, but we're not so good at that. Let's run an enablement program, or let's do a session on this. But I think it's definitely a very, very multi-phased, long-term goal. I suppose, to give you my anecdotal side of it, at Andela, I worked on Gong every day for about 15 months. We won the Golden Gong Award, and I would say that I was probably about 50% of the way to where I wanted to be. So it does take that length of time, and there just has to be quite a lot of planning that goes into it.
I mean, amazing insights there. But one of the things that I loved is when you said you won the award for sort of revenue achievement or revenue performance. Sounds like those 15 months weren't wasted then,
No.
and there was a direct correlation to increased revenue and increased adoption of Andela's services. Talk to me a little bit about how that was tracked and how and what happened there.
But we threw the kitchen sink at it, and there was a couple of false starts in there. I think the first false start was the coaching culture side of things. And the reason I say that is I made the mistake of assuming that because when I was a sales leader and a sales manager that I loved coaching and I really saw the benefit of coaching and I really loved Gong, I just assumed that all the other leaders were exactly the same. So we go, okay, guys, we want you to use this, we want you to do that. Here's your minimum expectations, go. And unsurprisingly, it sort of fell flat, right? So we sort of it's, but I think the messaging was right. Just the execution wasn't particularly well done, and we're battling against that thing. And every person listening to this will roll their eyes, but managers saying, "I don't have time." Right, and that's the number one pushback. And I think that there certainly can be truth in that, but most of the time there is not, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, I think one of the first things we did was look at the coaching culture, and ask managers to look at it. And I personally, because I was sort of spearheading it, I think in 2022 I listened to 2,238 Gong calls personally, right, which is a massive time investment. But that's how much I believed it would be a difference maker for the team. I think from there, probably one of the main elements that, in fact, one of the most simplistic things that we did, that I did very right at the start, we were focusing on enterprise, and I was listening to all these calls, and the first thing I noticed is we weren't setting an agenda or an upfront contract, and I noticed that just purely by listening to lots of calls. So it was almost like bookending the call, and the other element was, um, our most common close was, "So what do you think?" So what was happening is we get to the end, and there wasn't much, no, you know, closing for next steps or getting the next meeting in the diary. So lots of people were getting to the end of the qualification call, as we call it, and then they would get ghosted. Oh, that call went really good. So again, it was something like 17% of all calls, discovery calls, had an agenda, and like 4% had like a solid, solidified next step. So I went to present this to the enterprise team, and by a divine twist of fate, the CRO happened to be on the call as well, and I didn't know that he was going to be there. So I presented this, and he was like, "Is this a joke?" And I was like, "No." So then that gave us a month where we actually set very, very like, and it wasn't just the word agenda; it was anything like that. But within that month, we took it from like 17% to like 51% of calls. Again, as a standalone figure, 51% is not great, but the percentage improvement was fantastic. And then we had the same at closing for call, and then we saw the knock-on impact of that. So we started very, very small, right? Like a very small thing like that. Did something very similar with the SDRs, where managers were coming and going, "We really need objection handling training." And I'm like, "Well, says who?" "Well, based on what?" So they're getting so many objections in calls. Okay. So then I went to listen to lots of these calls, and they were getting objections. However, the context was a little bit off. The reason they were getting objections is because we were opening the call with a bad question. So for those who don't know, Andela do staff augmentation, but we'd never speak to HR or talent acquisition teams. We would only speak to VPs of engineering, CTOs. But what the SDRs were doing is we're going to getting a VP of engineering and saying, Ben, I see that you've got 2 vacancies live on LinkedIn. So they said, yeah, you're going to speak to talent acquisition. So immediately they're on the back foot. So they're asking the wrong question to the wrong power. So then they'd overcome that objection, then that objection, and then there'd be another one. So there wasn't a conversation. It was essentially like a button heads every time. So what we did is we used that information, and then we then created a new cold call framework where we'd open with insights, we'd ask relevant, insightful discovery questions, and that took from there, within a very short space of time, you're working with the managers, giving them new scorecards, stuff like that. It took from most meetings for SDRs being booked over email to the month of the most meetings being booked by phone in Andela history, just by using like some of the information we had there. And we had, lots of different things that we did from there, but those are 2 like sort of small but super impactful things that we did.
I mean, some of those figures are very believable because you often never know what's going on a call. You
Sure.
know, you have sometimes for a dial day or what they sometimes call blitz days in the US, that you have it whereby you make hundreds of calls, and no matter how well you're trained or enabled, how consistent is the messaging?
Yeah.
What are the actual objections? Because sometimes you hear like sales will say, it's definitely price. That's the number one objection. But has your conversation led them to the conversation around price? So are you kind of going down the alleyway and then going, oh, I'm down this alleyway again
Yeah.
there? One of the fascinating things you sort of talked about is sort of scorecards. You've used the word benchmark. I love, these are 2 words that I love in
Yeah.
enablement. Talk to me about how you built out scorecarding around that once you've sort of identified some of these enablement gaps or areas of improvement, as well as how you benchmarked.
Yeah, I think that we started with the data, and what I mean by that is where can we move the needle. So, and I'm sure we're going to get to this later, but I worked quite a lot with RevOps when I was at Andela in particular, but we looked quite a lot at stage to stage conversion. So the thing is you can set up a scorecard for every single type of call, but what's the value? What's the return on investment of that time? And our manager, if you approach a manager and say, "We have 10 new scorecards for you," are they going to be as excited if you say, "Look, see for this one type of call, I've got this really good scorecard." So we started with that. So with SDRs, because we were trying to increase the number of meetings booked by phone, because we were doing quite well on LinkedIn and on email. You need the biggest needle mover was by phone. So we looked at that, and I guess what we did is we created best practice from the cold call framework. I'm a big frameworks person rather than a scripts person, but we would have like permission based opener. So we give them like 2 or 3 different examples, so they could like mix and match, almost like pick and mix for what they wanted. Open with insights, relevant, insightful discovery questions, objection handling, and did they book a meeting or closing for the meeting. So that was our sort of framework. So because that was our framework, that's what our scorecard reflected. So we did it on 0 to 5. So and we created a scoring rubric, because one of the biggest things I found with scorecards, and is unless you're prescriptive with it, your 3 out of 5 might be completely different from mine, and I know that from Mandela because I was seen as I would say the most realistic, but I was seen as the toughest scorer of scorecards, because that's the thing. I set the best practice, so then I knew what I wanted. So what we did is we created a scoring rubric for every. So this is what a 1 is, etc., all the way to 5 for each of the questions. And we actually did that a little bit better when I went to staff base, because we used winning by design. So we didn't use we used BANT as a qualification methodology for AEs, but we didn't have a sales methodology. So we actually put the rubric in the scorecard. So if, like, did they get the situations 1 to 5? So it was actually in the question. So again, there was no need to refer to another document. But again, based on the framework that we wanted, what is best practice, we spoke to the managers, we spoke to the reps. This is what this is. This is what we did. For AEs, it was qualification calls or discovery calls. So the very first one in the cycles, as I said, we discovered that the conversion rate wasn't particularly good for calls that we were going into. So again, we had to define What is our framework? What is it that we need to get? So we had a little bit of banter in there, less so. But again, it was like, did they set an agenda? Yes, no. Did they open the call with relevant insights or relevant and up to date insights? How were the discovery questions? Then we moved. We didn't have it like this, but we changed it. Did they get a need, stroke pain in the conversation? We used to present on the call. Did they present Andela in an insightful way, whatever the wording was? Did they close for the meeting, etc., etc.? So we created the scorecards based around what we wanted to see, and then worked backwards from there. And again, we did something similar for CSMs, but later in the process, or what we call client partners. But it has to marry up. And again, there's no at Starbase when I joined, they had maybe 6 different scorecards, and I was like, well, that's a lot, right? Like in different types of calls. Like, what are we focusing on right now, this week, this month, this quarter? Because it's easier to get managers to be bought into that. So that's what we started there, and through the wonders of Gong, we had so much data that got spat out off the back of that. So we had a variety of different sort of dashboards. The main one I would say for the revenue improvement, the revenue performance improvement, was we had a dashboard on Salesforce. So from the scorecards, so we asked managers to score 1 call per rep per week. And we had an agreement with the managers, so it would bring it up in like a bar chart, and anyone who was a 2.9 or below, we would immediately reach out to the manager and to the rep and be like, okay, let's look at this. So revenue, I suppose, like performance management before it became a performance issue. But then to the flip side of that coin, if anyone was like a 4.5 and above consistently, we knew where to go to find this, that, and the other, or to go to that even deeper level. I think lots of people miss. If someone's at a 4.6 consistently, top performer, and those are the people that say, no, I'm good, I don't need any enablement. But from the scorecard, you can actually then go, okay, you're really good at this, and this, but your objection handling is only a 3. So now you can actually bait the hook to suit the fish of the conversation that you're having with that person. Rather than going, we're going to teach you how to do discovery, when you go, are you joking? I'm 220%. You're like, well, if we can get you to a 3 out of 5 to a 4 out of 5 on objection handling, what sort of difference would that make to you? So again, you can actually tailor the conversations, be a lot more bespoke with individuals to that point as well. So you start very macro, all the way to micro, but be very focused on the impact that you want to make and the type of calls you want to change.
Yeah, I mean, because we spoke about I don't have time for that earlier. You mentioned that
Yeah.
the managers say that, and sales will say that in enablement and coaching and training in general. I don't have time. I need to be on the phone selling. But sometimes it's really important, and this is true for enablement, coaching, sales as well. Less can be more. You
Sure.
can overdo it when it comes to enablement. You can have too many projects that don't hit the nail. My favorite thing to always say to VPs of sales is, how much of a difference does the enablement team need to make in order for my team to justify their value? So is it 2% of your number? Is it 5% of your number? And then using the velocity matrix to work out how we get to that overall 2%, where that might be, in such as your case, having agendas set for, by 300-400% more, or closing maybe 500 to 1,000% more in terms of closing agreements on calls. Um, and I love the way you use the methodology to come into the scorecards, because sometimes businesses are going to be using CICA, and they're going to be like, wow, I don't know where to start when it comes to building a scorecard. And there'll be suggested scorecards, but
Yeah.
sometimes they might not, really hit the nail or extract the needles properly.
Yeah.
So let's sort of talk a little bit about some other things, like a more holistic area. You've been in AI, or working with AI, for multiple years now, and using it a lot. I think it's a 2,200 call, a lot of call listening there going on. What have you seen change over the last 2 to 3 years? Because it is a high growth market, especially when it comes to the tools themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're getting more intelligent. I think there's still a massive human factor that needs to be in there, especially when it comes to coaching, but also when it comes to data. I had a really good phrase on a call with Danielle from E for Enable, where it is, data is king, but context is God. And I think that sums up how I think about it. And I think we're seeing lots of AI being used in conversation intelligence, but I think it's really good at providing great call summaries and very top level information. But I still feel you have to dig into that. I still feel, for example, if you go to like the deal boards on Gong, like we had it set up where we had like spiced trackers. So if that but it's only a tick box, right? So did a situation, because we use smart trackers, was that box ticked? Yes. That's not quite good enough for me, right? And I don't believe it should be good enough for sales leaders who are forecasting revenue. So you can go in and say pain. Right, cool. So as I say, the AI and the machine learning is getting really, really good and really, really intelligent. I still think there's a massive human component, as I say, and I think you have to dive into that to understand the context of which the quote unquote pain was discovered. Or did they ask two questions about situation, or was it one? Did they really get an implication of that pain and that problem, right? Like I think so. I've seen it come along massively, and I think it's taking you from trying to find a needle in a haystack to having a real map of where to go and look and dig. I think I look at it now almost. This is the way I used to use like discovery calls, almost like a bit like a metal detector. When it beeps, you dig, and I think that it's giving you the map of where to go. Your metal detector, but you still need to dig down and get to the crux of the information. I think I don't think we're at the point yet of being able to just trust it as for what it says. And interestingly, we want to do that, but we wouldn't trust a salesperson for what they say, and it's essentially just giving you what a salesperson said, right? So I think for me, it's absolutely getting there, and it's coming on like quarter over quarter. It's unbelievable, the improvement. I just don't think even when it comes to just the data, it's not ready. And I think it's a whole other conversation when it comes to coaching. And feedback for me is massively different from coaching. And there's nothing wrong with lots of these tools giving you feedback, or you said this, or you didn't say that. That's fine. But my big phrase is feedback is opinion on something that's already happened. Coaching has a potential to influence future performance. Feedback is fine. It's great. You still need a human to coach, in my opinion. So AI and CI and machine learning, I think we're probably a month away from the minority report that we're all scared of, right? But well, I don't think we're there yet, and I think we've still got a bit to go.
Yeah, I mean, and that's always my fascinating take. As a chess player, I saw computers come in and
Yeah.
effectively AI about, the best part of 2.5 decades ago. Like really, and the formation of true AI, or what we now know as AI, was about 4 or 5 years ago, with
Mm.
sort of Alpha Zero and other things. And yet it's improved. Chess is still improved, and it's still the human beings that utilize the tools the best that are the most successful. It's not that computers have taken over and are getting the sponsorship deals that, say,
Yeah.
Magnus Carlsen are. I've definitely got my soundbite reel for this call from the last bit of answer you've got there. A few wonderful little phrases and terms there. Um, if and I have to say I totally agree with the human element being absolutely critical there. I love the comparison with feedback compared to coaching as well. That's really really it's one I'm definitely going to be stealing and using myself. So thank you for that. But if you could go, this is a very famous question, but if you could go back in sort of a time machine to when you first started using conversational intelligence and give yourself, say, 1 to 3 tips, you can have as many as three, what would those tips be and why?
I think the first one, as I kind of touched on, is don't assume. I think it's very difficult to assume, as I say, whether that be assuming that people want to use it, whether that be assuming that the data is what it says it is. I think those assumptions, like lots of platforms, not just conversation intelligence, I think they've got all the data and all the stats, and it's lovely to sit and look at that, especially if it's trending in the direction you want it to trend. That's all lovely, but it does. Don't assume that it's right. I think the biggest thing for me, the second biggest thing would be, again, as I've already touched on, is use it to move the needle. Right, as I say, like I used to only use conversation intelligence as a compliance tool, right? Like I just like, are you saying what I told you to say? That's cool. And as I say, like my thing is like, let's start using it a little bit further up. So you mentioned, let's say, sales velocity. So if we identify that, a higher average order value is the lever that we want to pull within the sales velocity equation, where are we currently not doing that well? And we can use it to find, is it the discovery call? Is it the demo call? So I would use that as the sort of the compass of where to do it. And again, that just has that trickle down effect of, okay, so this is what we're working on. This is where we think we need to do it. Then it can go down to methodology to that point, right? And we're like, well, which parts of the methodology do we need to understand if we get an impact at this part? Does it really matter, etc., etc.? So I would dig into that, and then, as I say, then I know as an enablement person, we need to do this sort of program, and I can sell that to the leaders because it will move this 1 to 10%, whatever it is. But I can also sell it to the reps because I can go like, we're not working on all these other things, we're working on this because of that. So I think that makes it easier, and I think I came to that probably my second 6 months of being involved. Again, probably the SDR cold call framework was probably the first time I went, actually, we can make a real difference here. And we did. And then I think the third thing would be constantly stay up to date. And what I'm with like the stats that matter. To give you an example, lots of people are especially with Gong in particular, lots of people, managers, reps, enablement people, really like bothered about like talk ratio. And depending on who you speak to, you'll find out what the talk ratio is, or let's say the number of questions you ask. Is that actually important? Because I used to think it was. Like I used to think it was 80-20. You want your customer talking 80% of the time. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone else is talking 80% of the time? It's not much fun, right? So again, nowadays you're probably looking at 60-40 on either side. The number of questions. Again, you speak to Gong and like, if you're speaking at an enterprise C-suite level, don't ask any more than 15 questions. Well, what 15 questions though, right? Like, I just think there's so much more to it. But I used to think some of these sort of like surface level stats or data points were really, really important, but actually they didn't make much difference to me or to my org. So I think it's don't just take that out the box, I suppose, like what you mentioned earlier. Find out what matters to you and to your org and what will make the difference. So yeah, to summarize would be don't assume, don't use it as a compliance tool, use it as a compass to find out how to move the needle, and then find the stats and the data that actually make a difference to you and your org.
Really amazing stuff. I knew there was a reason I had you on my first episode, Kieran. This has got
It wasn't the
you did.
begging and crying from my side, though.
Yeah, well, you didn't just win I've got my own gold out of this from your Gong Award. So we're gonna sort of finish the conversation around sort of AI and analytics and get to a few bits of fun to end this first podcast. This is a play on a very famous game on the playground, but so I need to be careful to reword it so I don't get some people in the future saying to you, Kieran, I watched your podcast and you said to avoid
Yeah,
this segment. So we've got someone you're in love with,
yeah.
in terms of who you live with, your best friend, and your good mate. They're your three, yeah. And you've got you've got the three main pillars, and I know there's more than three nowadays with the way enablement has evolved. And slight plug for your podcast there in terms of the terminology.
Yeah.
And when it comes to sales, operations, and marketing, so which one are you in love with, or would you live with? Which one's your best mate? And then which one's your good friend?
So the one I'm absolutely and utterly in love with RevOps, and I know that many people find this strange. I think probably from some of the things I've said, you can hear that I'm quite a data lover, right? But I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, my background is sales, so maybe that's slightly different, right? Like I've been in sales a long time, so I tend to know the ins and outs of that. If without obviously the minutia can be different org to org. However, what I found, the reason that I would put sales in the second one, is because what I found is when only speaking like my opinion or enablement's opinion versus sales opinion, quite often you're going on gut feel versus gut feel, and that tends to lead to like a head butting conversation. So the reason I love working with RevOps in general. Anyway, I'm a big data person, as I say, I'm a big conversion rates. I'm a big where do we work? But I find that if I go to sales and put data at the center of that conversation, I'm asking your opinion, I'm giving you my opinion on why we should or should not work on that, rather than being like, I think we should do this. If I go, the data says that if we want to, the CRO says we need to improve, win rate. Okay, the best based on the data, or based on the conversion rate, the best way we can do that is this. What do you think? So again, I'm taking my, even though it is, I'm guiding the conversation, I'm putting the data at the center of it. And as I say, like for me, I'm a big impact and outcome focused enablement person. So I also find that is a really good way to help me prioritize. I know we all struggle with prioritization. And I think sometimes it's really good to say to people, which OKR or which which company goal does this project align to? But that's almost like a little bit obtuse at times. You can be like, okay, so what difference is this going to make? Right? Why do you want to work on this? Or if you're working on like this tiny bit, what is that? How does that cascade up or cascade down? So yeah, for me, very much RevOps at the center of that. As I've mentioned to you before, like when I was at Andela, I was fortunate enough, and Staffbase, but I was fortunate enough to work with really good RevOps teams, and we for every project we had like an enablement lead and a RevOps lead, just to make sure that there was like constant communication. So yeah, then after that, definitely sales. I think my sales, my enablement superpower and kryptonite is the same thing, which is having been a salesperson and a sales leader. I've sat in every sales seat other than CRO. So I think that helps, but also hinders at times, because obviously I've been doing it for 16, 17 years, and you might speak to a manager who's been doing it for 16 months. And that was one of the things I had when I first came in. I was like, okay, it'd be easy to give you the answer. However, if everyone gave me the answer when I was going through this, I wouldn't have become the person I was or the leader that I was. So that can be difficult at times. And then, unfortunately, just in the best friend slot, marketing would sit in there. For a variety of different reasons. And I believe genuinely that enablement is the key or the delta to take sales and marketing alignment to sales and marketing integration. I genuinely believe that. Because I think we've got to the point where sales and marketing are not quite cat and dog. They're sort of like two dogs that live next door that bark at each other through a fence, right? So they're a little bit closer now. However, I still think there's a massive disconnect between what marketing, how they want the message conveyed, and how much sales should care about this new product marketing. So I think if we're that sort of bridge between the two in enablement, I think we can get there. However, I think I could do my, if you were to take operations away, I don't think I could do my job. Obviously, being in revenue enablement, I don't think I could do my job. It would be much easier to do my job if I didn't have a relationship with marketing, unfortunately. But that's just how I see the world.
I'm just having a vision in my head of taking my sort of CRO or head of international and my head of marketing on a walk together, and maybe having a game, a board game, or a toy to play with. I wonder what the looks like would give that. But yeah, I totally agree. We are very much one of the sort of segues to making sure, and that less is more is one of the critical things I think my relationship with marketing has learned over the last sort of few years is that sometimes we can produce tons of content, but if it's not used, if it's not put in front of customers, we can't track it through a CMS and how
Yeah,
much it's used, what bits of it are you looked at through various tools, then how much ROI is there? Was that worth even bothering doing if no
yeah.
one's going to look at it and it's not going to add any value to the sales team or to the customer? The answer is probably no. And so we are kind of in that kind of best friend zone, like we help each other. Sometimes
Sometimes.
sometimes we can be barking at each other, but I would say these days in the evolution of enablement, that's the case. Well, Kieran, this has been an absolute pleasure, as always. And I know that there is so much amazing content here. I think that I totally agree. AI and humans coexist. It is there to enhance, not replace. That's one of my favorite terms to say. And very much amazing insight. For anyone out there, if you want to catch Kieran, you can plug your podcast that you do a little bit of Hector, and if you want to talk us through that quickly.
Yeah, I'm the host of the Enablement Evolved podcast, where we talk to thought leaders such as yourself, Ben. I took a little bit of a break when my son was born, and then obviously over Christmas. But we're going to start recording again soon. Also, I get contacted by lots and lots of people who would like some help with conversation intelligence, even if it's just like a double checking that they're not going crazy because they can't see the wood for the trees. Trust me, everyone gets in the same position. So yeah, if anyone has any other questions, by all means, reach out on LinkedIn or anywhere else, and I'll do my best to help you out.
Thank you very much. And this concludes the first episode. And if you like this episode, give it some comments on either LinkedIn or your podcast host platform of choice. And thank you, Kieran, again, and have a great day, everyone.